Imagine being somewhere like Beijing during that big car boom. The air tasting, well, gritty, hot breath behind a mask, just endless traffic. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. That kind of uh, visceral experience with pollution, it really sets the stage for why electric vehicles have gained so much momentum.
Right. And for this deep dive, we're looking at Volt Rush, a book that, digs into the supply chains behind it all. It's not just about the shiny new cars.
Exactly. It goes beyond the marketing. It looks at the often quite secretive resource companies, these big private Chinese firms, and yeah, the major car makers like Tesla and VW trying to figure this all out.
So the core question we're asking based on the book is, what are the real costs? Environmentally, socially, digging up all this stuff for the green revolution.
Yeah, we need to look closely, right, to make sure we're not just swapping one set of problems for another,
Yeah.
avoiding that kind of greenwash.
And for you listening, understanding this gives you a bit of power, doesn't it? As a consumer, you can actually push companies to do better this time around.
It's a chance to learn, definitely. And, it's easy to think EVs are brand new, but Volt Rush points out the battery age had begun much, much earlier.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. It's kind of wild that Thomas Edison and Henry Ford were actually early believers in electric cars.
Right. Edison loved electricity. No whirring and grinding gears, he said. None of that dangerous and evil-smelling gasoline and no noise. Sounds good now, actually.
Totally. And Ford, back in 1914, even announced plans for a cheap electric car. He was working with Edison on a better battery, lightweight, long range.
It's an aha moment, isn't it?
Right.
This isn't some futuristic dream. They were thinking about this over a century ago, that desire for cleaner transport.
Exactly. The car meant freedom, right? And EVs were seen as freedom without the fossil fuel guilt that came later, kind of like the UK moving away from coal now, trying to clean things up.
It's a similar push, but back then the big roadblock was the battery. There was this 1911 article just asking battery. They needed something better for electric trucks, more speed, more range. That question mark says it all.
And Edison, he really went for it. A 9-year quest, the book calls it, to make a better battery, aiming to triple the energy density of the old lead-acid ones.
He unveiled his nickel-iron battery in 1901, nickel positive, iron negative, potassium hydroxide electrolyte. He even used graphite, interestingly enough.
Which is huge in today's batteries. The press was apparently super enthusiastic back then.
Oh yeah, they thought it was the next big thing. Edison himself was predicting electric cars would beat gasoline ones on long trips by 1903.
But, and this is the key bit, getting that battery to market took too long. It proved fatal, as the book says.
Yeah, because meanwhile, the internal combustion engine was just improving so fast, Ford's Model T came out.
Right before Edison really got going.
Yeah.
And it just took over the mass market. Plus, there was all this hype about, like, a 200-mile battery that didn't materialize, creating disappointment.
So by the end of that decade, petrol cars had won the race. It's a real lesson in timing and how tech evolves, isn't it?
Definitely. Okay, so fast forward to now. Batteries are obviously critical again, not just for cars, but for storing renewable energy, too.
John Goodenough, one of the key guys behind lithium-ion, he stressed how vital batteries are to get burning fossil fuels off the highways and tackle global warming.
And he, along with Whittingham and Yoshino, got the Nobel Prize for that lithium-ion work. Whittingham started at ExxonMobil looking at different materials before landing on lithium.
But his early lithium battery had issues, right? Lower voltage and a risk of fire because these things called dendrites forming.
Then Goodenough came along and developed better cathode materials. That was the breakthrough that really boosted the voltage and energy storage.
Yeah, the book is clear.
Yeah.
Without this scientific research, we would not be buying electric cars today. Simple as that.
So the science was there. Who actually scaled it up? That brings us to CATL, right? Now the world's biggest EV battery maker.
Contemporary Amperex Technology Limited. Yeah, their story's fascinating. Spun off from another company, ATL, and got massive support from the Chinese government.
That government backing was huge. And they made smart moves, like hiring Bob Galian from GM's old EV1 project.
And that early partnership with BMW Brilliance, BMW's joint venture in China, was crucial. BMW's tough testing really pushed CATL to improve its standards. The founder, Zheng Yuquan, admitted they learned a lot from BMW.
And their growth was just explosive. By 2016, they were making more batteries for one bus company than Tesla had used in its entire history up to that point.
Went public in 2017. Key factors. Zheng's experience in the hyper-competitive phone battery market helped their M&M's philosophy man and machine blending skilled workers with custom tech.
But also, let's be frank, the book points to brute protectionism from Beijing. Subsidies, lists saying you had to use approved Chinese batteries in Chinese-made EVs.
Yeah, the VW China CEO basically confirmed that local cars needed local batteries. It shows how much government strategy shaped this industry.
Absolutely. Okay, so you need the batteries, but you also need the raw materials. Let's talk lithium. Ganfeng Lithium comes up China's top producer of lithium hydroxide.
Right, that's the stuff in Tesla's higher-powered batteries.
Yeah.
And the journey is quite something. Rock mined in Australia,
Shipped up the Yangtze River.
processed in China using coal-fired plants. Takes a significant amount of coal per ton of lithium.
But Ganfeng is also looking ahead, right? Researching things like lithium metal batteries.
Yeah, that's seen as a potential holy grail. Could store maybe 10 times the energy of graphite. Game-changing for planes? Maybe. Stanley Whittingham actually worked on lithium metal way back at ExxonMobil.
Wow. And Ganfeng thinks this tech could be in cars by, what, 2025 or 2026?
That's the hope. But the current lithium supply chain has been pretty volatile. Early sources in Xinjiang ran out.
So China started importing from Australia, like the Greenbushes mine.
Then cheaper production started up in Chile in the Atacama Desert by SQM. That caused prices to crash and actually bankrupted the original Xinjiang plant. Shows how interconnected it all is.
And the Australian story is interesting too. Geologists looking for tantalum stumble upon massive lithium deposits in the Pilbara region.
Yeah, one of them, Neil Biddle, wasn't even focused on lithium until Tesla announced the Gigafactory. Then suddenly, lithium was a big deal.
Leading to mines like Pilgangoora in Australia becoming the world's biggest lithium miner almost overnight.
But that rapid growth led to a flooded market, prices collapsing again by 2019. Plus a tragic incident at a mine, then COVID. It put huge strain on companies like Pilbara Minerals.
The CEO called it like China catching a cold and Western Australia getting pneumonia. Classic boom and bust.
Exactly. Now, shifting to Chile and SQM, Julio Ponce Lerou is a central figure there, turning this failing fertilizer company into a lithium giant after privatization under Pinochet.
The book describes the atmosphere at SQM as a bit unusual. And that privatization process, meant to give workers shares, ended up concentrating control with Ponce Lerou through holding companies.
Yeah, the Cascadas. There were allegations workers were pressured to sell their shares cheaply. Raises questions about fairness in these big resource deals.
It does. And sticking with materials, cobalt is another big one. The book mentions VW kind of miscalculating when negotiating prices.
Right. They treated cobalt miners like, widget makers, not understanding the mining complexities and costs. Negotiations just broke down.
And cobalt, that brings up huge ethical questions, doesn't it? Over 60% comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, one of the poorest, most corrupt places on Earth.
It creates this terrible dilemma for companies, sourced from huge industrial miners like Glencore, who face their own corruption scandals.
Or sourced from artisanal miners, the small-scale guys, where you risk child labor issues.
It's a really tough choice.
Yeah.
And Glencore, under Ivan Glasenberg, well, the book suggests shareholder value often came first. He apparently indicated they'd sell copper and cobalt assets to China if the price was right, despite Western car makers' worries.
And Glencore's history in the DRC is tangled up with this figure, Dan Gertler, right? An Israeli billionaire close to the former president.
Very close. Gertler acted as a key facilitator. Glencore apparently channeled huge sums to his offshore companies, leading to U.S. sanctions against him and estimates of massive losses for the Congo itself from these deals.
Yet, Glencore kind of played geopolitics, telling the Trump administration that selling assets to Gertler would mean they'd end up with China, creating a monopoly.
It's incredibly complex, a Gordian knot, the book calls it. Even after Glencore went public, these ties to Gertler raised ethical sourcing questions for shareholders.
And Gertler was getting huge daily royalties from cobalt and copper sales, ending up in our phones and cars. Sobering.
Though under investor pressure, Glasenberg did commit to capping Glencore's coal production, suggesting maybe a shift away from coal at least.
This really highlights the ecological shadows of consumption, doesn't it? The costs are hidden, borne by people far away. Cobalt demand keeps rising even as batteries get more efficient.
Precisely. And Chinese companies like Huayu Cobalt invested heavily in the DRC, buying mines, becoming key intermediaries, shipping cobalt mostly to China for electronics and EVs.
Supplying Sony, Apple, VW. For a long time, nobody really asked where the cobalt came from as long as it was cheap.
Even the London Metal Exchange was slow to bring in responsible sourcing rules for cobalt because so much comes from the DRC.
And ironically, despite the scandals, Glencore became a preferred supplier for car makers because the alternative artisanal mining seemed riskier regarding child labor.
Yeah, some NGO efforts to clean up artisanal mining might have actually inadvertently helped the big players like Glencore. And ultimately, Chinese dominance, helped by corruption, crashed prices, hurting the small Congolese miners.
There's a real fear of cobalt becoming a blood mineral that everyone avoids. Okay, let's switch to nickel. Elon Musk made that plea in 2020, right? For more clean nickel.
He did. Tesla needed more. The book then looks at the Romu nickel mine in Papua New Guinea, run by a Chinese company, which uses deep-sea tailings disposal, dumping waste straight into the ocean.
Which sounds bad, especially given PNG's history with mining damage, like the Bougainville conflict.
An environmental consultant trying to assess the damage and propose fixes, but wasn't allowed to finish his work. Raises concerns about influence.
And the future nickel supply increasingly looks like Indonesia, where Chinese firms invested massively after Indonesia banned raw ore exports.
Musk was worried about supply. He offered a giant contract for environmentally sound nickel, but the big miners like Glencore, BHP, Vale didn't have huge expansion plans.
Quick history bit. Edison actually found nickel in Canada while looking for iron ore.
He did. Nickel comes in two main types. Sulfide, easier to process, found in places like Russia, Canada, and laterite, more common in the tropics like Indonesia, Philippines, but needs more energy, often coal, to process.
Entered Tsingshan, a Chinese company not well known but became huge in nickel by setting up in Indonesia after that export ban.
Right. Some compare it to China's earlier takeover of the steel market. The ban basically forced anyone needing Indonesian nickel to deal with Tsingshan or operate there.
There were even allegations Tsingshan manipulated LME nickel prices. And the timing of the ban, right after Tsingshan's founder met the Indonesian president, looks suspicious.
Definitely raised eyebrows about lobbying. Tsingshan, with Chinese backing, built this enormous stainless steel complex in Sulawesi, the Morowali Industrial Park, powered by coal. Became the world's cheapest producer.
Creating an oligopsony, lots of small miners selling to a few big buyers like Tsingshan, drives down ore prices, maybe cuts corners on environmental protection.
And other Chinese companies are following their lead in Indonesia now. Okay, let's move to copper. Robert Friedland, the green roper tycoon.
His argument is interesting. Oil companies, not car makers, were the big winners from gasoline cars. He sees copper playing that role for EVs.
His Kamoa-Kakula mine in the DRC is supposedly one of the richest on Earth, and copper demand is booming for clean energy. EVs use way more copper than petrol cars.
But meeting that demand is tough. Ore grades are falling in places like Chile, meaning more energy, more waste to get the same amount of copper.
Friedland is quite dismissive of Chilean mines. And China needed copper mines, as Western firms owned most existing big ones. So they started buying, like the Las Bambas mine in Peru.
Friedland saw the EV potential early. Copper is the king of metals, he declared. And his connections in China helped.
Yeah, when copper prices fell in 2015, Chinese state-owned firms like Zijin Mining and Sitocatic Metal invested heavily in his Kamoa mine. They clearly believe in the long-term demand.
Okay, so land-based mining has all these issues. What about mining the seabed? The book talks about these polymetallic nodules.
Right, found on the deep ocean floor. Contain nickel, manganese, copper, cobalt, like a lithium-ion battery lying on the ocean floor, as one company put it.
Enough potential resource in the Pacific's Clarion-Clipperton zone to electrify the whole world's cars multiple times over, apparently.
That's the claim. But the deep sea, once thought barren, is actually full of unique life, especially around hydrothermal vents. We're still discovering species.
So, deep-sea mining is controversial. The UN Law of the Sea has protected it for decades. Environmentalists David Attenborough, they warn about irreversible damage, extinction. They say recycle first.
But the mining companies, like Deep Green, now the metals company, argue it could be less damaging than land mining, and recycling won't be enough. Some scientists say we need to experiment to even understand the impacts.
It's hard to compare the value of, say, a rainforest versus a deep-sea ecosystem, isn't it? And deep-sea mining would likely add to land mining, not replace it.
True. The International Seabed Authority, ISA, issues exploration licenses, but no commercial mining has started yet. They're still working on the rules, environmental assessments, monitoring, royalties for developing nations.
Companies like GSR are testing robots, like Patania II, to suck up nodules, though they had a setback when a cable broke.
Yeah, highlights the challenges down there. The GSR head, Chris Van Negen, sees it as dredging, not mining, but he's frustrated by NGO opposition, believes the ISA framework can manage it.
Which brings us neatly to reduce, reuse, recycle. Even Henry Ford talked about conserving materials back in 1926.
And J.B. Straubel, Tesla's former CTO, he's all about recycling. Started Redwood Materials to recover nickel, cobalt, lithium from old batteries.
His recovery rates are impressive. He calls used electronics and EV batteries a massive, untapped resource.
And crucially, metals aren't like fossil fuels. You can recycle them almost endlessly. Straubel envisions a closed-loop system, reducing mining, lowering costs.
But there's that paradox, the rebound effect. We get more efficient, but we just consume more overall. Cars get better fuel economy, but they also get bigger and heavier.
And the circular economy concept often feels superficial, right? Electronics don't last long. E-waste recycling rates are low.
Yet that e-waste has way higher concentrations of valuable metals than actual mined ore. A Glencore exec even prefers calling it post-consumer scrap.
And bigger ED batteries could make the waste problem huge. We need solutions like Matthew Quitter's company retrofitting old cars with electric motors and used neon-leaf batteries.
Giving batteries a second, even third life. He argues it's better than scrapping perfectly good cars, considering the emissions from manufacturing a new EV. Makes sense.
Then there's Peter Carlson, another Tesla veteran, who co-founded Northvolt in Europe, trying to build a European battery champion.
Because Europe kind of missed the boat initially, right? Focused on diesel, didn't build battery capacity, lost its solar industry too.
Northvolt wants to do it differently. 100% renewable energy for manufacturing, aiming for 50% recycled content by 2030, ethical supply chains.
Battery making is energy intensive, so that green manufacturing is key. They've got big backing from the EU, VW, Goldman Sachs. Shows Europe is serious now.
But the book ends with a stark reminder. That massive diesel spill in the Russian Arctic near Norilsk-Nickel's operations. Pollution from mining is an ongoing risk.
So wrapping this up, it's clear the EV revolution is, well, it's complicated. There's this long history, incredible innovation in batteries, but also China's dominance.
And these significant environmental and social costs tied to mining, lithium, cobalt, nickel. Then you have potential future paths like deep-sea mining or really robust recycling.
It definitely makes you think beyond just swapping your petrol car for an electric one. Considering these ecological shadows, this hidden impact, what do we actually need to do individually and collectively to make this transition genuinely sustainable?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? It's not just about the car, it's the whole system. Understanding these complexities, keeping the pressure on for responsible practices, that's vital as this battery age unfolds.